Centuries ago, the vegetables that kept people alive were an entirely different league. Some held forgotten flavors, others more nutrition than anything in your fridge, and a few could save your life in a crisis. The surprising part is that many of them are still out there, quietly growing wild in hedgerows, clinging to cliffs, or hiding in old cottage gardens, waiting to be noticed again. Today at Stellar Eureka, we are bringing 10 of these medieval survival vegetables back into the light. They fed empires, outlasted plagues, and can turn any modern garden into a fortress of resilience. We start with a vegetable that was once considered so valuable it could pay your rent, yet it now hides almost entirely from the modern table. In the dead of winter in medieval Europe, when snow sealed the fields and grain stores ran dangerously low, survival often depended on what was hidden beneath the soil. Deep underground, clusters of slender white roots waited untouched by frost, holding enough sweetness and nutrition to sustain a family for months. This was Skirret, the medieval world's underground insurance policy. Once so prized that royal gardeners reserved space for it inside castle walls, Skirret offered a steady winter harvest when other crops failed. Its roots grew sweeter after frost, keeping their creamy chestnut-like flavor long after parsnips and carrots had turned woody or bitter. And because it was perennial, a single planting could quietly multiply for years, building a self-renewing food bank that lasted for almost nothing in return. Medieval cooks turned Skirret into survival fare and delicacy alike, boiling and mashing it like potatoes, roasting it to bring out caramel notes, or serving it raw in simple winter salads. Some of the most elaborate royal feasts of the period even featured intricate Skirret pies. Beyond taste, it delivered steady energy from complex carbohydrates and minerals often missing from medieval diets. In times when a failed harvest could mean starvation or worse, a Skirret patch was more than food. It was security, wealth, and resilience, all hidden beneath frozen ground. From the quiet, frost-covered gardens where Skirret waited underground, we head to the raw, wind-swept edges of medieval Europe. Here, salty air stings the skin, gulls wheel overhead, and the cliffs drop into restless seas. Along these borders of land and water, a plant flourished without care or cultivation, Alexander's, the wild larder of the coast. It grew where most crops would never dare, taking hold in stony soil along the ruins of Roman roads and in the spray of the tide. Its gift was abundance. Early spring shoots, tender and green, tasted like a bolder, richer version of celery. The leaves brought a peppery bite that could lift even the blandest porridge. Aromatic black seeds doubled as spice, standing in for imports too costly for most households. Even the thick taproot could be dug up and cooked like parsnips, turning a forager's find into a full meal. For coastal families, Alexander's was as dependable as the tide. It appeared when it was needed most, during the lean weeks when winter stores had dwindled and spring planting was still just green shoots in the soil. Inland, this gap could bring weakness, illness, even scurvy. On the coast, where Alexander's grew wild, families stayed strong. Monks recorded its value in meticulous detail. In some monasteries, seasonal harvests were organized with the discipline of a military campaign. Leaves were salted and preserved to last the winter, seeds stored for spice and medicine, and roots dried for the year ahead. In an age when food security was never guaranteed, discovering a plant that could feed families indefinitely must have felt like finding buried treasure. Alexander's wasn't the only gift the coastline gave to hungry medieval families. In the harshest, most exposed stretches of shore, where salt spray burned leaves and storms tore at the land, another plant was quietly thriving. It asked for no care, feared no weather, and gave back in abundance, the wild ancestor of every beet we know today. On the ragged edge of Europe, where cliffs drop into cold, restless water, sea beet rooted itself in sand dunes, rocky outcrops, and the cracks of wave-battered stone. It was nature's answer to the question of how to feed a family when the land seemed too hostile for anything green. The thick, waxy leaves resisted the salt spray that would scorch most crops. Deep taproots reached fresh water hidden beneath the sand, storing nutrients for the lean months. Even in the depths of winter, when inland gardens lay silent under frost, sea beet kept growing, a living larder ready to be harvested whenever the weather allowed. To coastal families, it was a constant ally. Young leaves, tender and mineral-rich, were cooked like spinach, lending a taste of the sea to winter meals. The roots, though smaller than modern beets, could be roasted or boiled to add bulk and energy to the diet. Entire communities depended on it to carry families through the final barren weeks before the first spring harvest. Sea beet's value was measured not only in nutrition, but in independence. It required no farmland, no seed stores, and no cultivation. Anyone willing to brave the winds and waves could gather it. Some medieval coastal settlements even built low stone walls to protect natural sea beet colonies from erosion, treating them as shared lifelines, safeguarded as carefully as fishing grounds or grazing pastures. Modern agriculture owes this hardy plant a debt. Over centuries, it gave rise to sugar beets, chard, and the beetroots we know today. But in the medieval world, it was prized for something simpler. It could keep you alive when almost nothing else would grow. From the roar of the waves and the sting of salt air, we return inland to the ordered rows of cottage gardens. Here, survival depended not on braving the elements, but on tending a plant so versatile and enduring that it became a family heirloom, a vegetable designed to feed you in every season of the year. In these cottage gardens, good King Henry stood as a cornerstone of year-round food security. From a single plant came 3 dependable harvests: tender shoots in early spring, leafy greens through the height of summer, and seed heads in autumn that could be dried and milled into flour. Nothing went unused. Flower buds were steamed like miniature broccoli, leaves provided daily sustenance, and the prized shoots were often reserved for honored guests. It was this versatility that made it a fixture for generations. After the winter scarcity, its asparagus-like shoots brought a welcome dose of fresh flavor and nutrition. The summer leaves, rich in iron and vitamins, filled pottages and stews. By autumn, the seeds could stretch grain stores when the harvest fell short. Gardeners treated a mature patch like living property, passing it down in wills and protecting it under local laws. Once established, it asked for little more than regular harvesting and would keep producing for decades. For households with limited access to meat or dairy, good King Henry quietly supplied the minerals and protein needed to stay healthy. In an era when food security depended on foresight, this modest plant offered a complete seasonal cycle of nutrition from the same square of soil. Leave the cottage gate and step into stone coolness. Monastery bells fade as you walk past racks of drying herbs and jars of vinegar. In a corner of the cellar sits a long trough filled with clean sand. Buried inside are roots as black as iron tools. When winter stretches on and the larder runs thin, the brothers reach into that sand and pull out sweetness that tastes like spring. That is where Scorzonera earns its reputation. To medieval gardeners, Scorzonera wasn't just another crop. It was a way to keep spring alive in the depths of winter. Behind monastery walls and in the sheltered corners of manor gardens, they tended these long, soot-black roots with quiet purpose. When the frost came, Scorzonera went into deep storage, packed in clean, dry sand where it would wait for months without losing its crispness or sweetness. While other vegetables rotted or shriveled, Scorzonera stayed perfect, ready to be pulled from the sand in the dead of winter, rinsed clean, and served as if it had just been dug from fresh soil. Its creamy white flesh carried a flavor both sweet and nutty, somewhere between asparagus and parsnip, a small luxury in the lean months. Its real strength was reliability. No barrels of brine, no smokehouses, no complex preservation, just sand, darkness, and patience. For families facing the unpredictable rhythm of medieval harvest, that meant insurance against hunger. Cooks used it with versatility. shaved thin and raw for a crisp bite, simmered until tender, or roasted until the edges caramelized like toasted sugar. Monastic kitchens served it during Lent, when meat was forbidden, counting on its richness to make austere meals satisfying. Herbalists valued it just as highly. Known as viper's grass, it was believed to counter poisons and purify the blood. They sliced the roots into tonics or steeped them in wine, unknowingly taking advantage of inulin, a fiber that modern science recognizes as a boon for digestive health. The plant's unusual appearance contributed to its mystical reputation. The stark contrast between its black exterior and white interior was interpreted as symbolic of hidden virtue and inner purity. This symbolism, combined with its practical value, made Scorzonera a prized ingredient in monastery cuisine. After the quiet security of Scorzonera stored in sand, survival sometimes depended on a sharper skill, the ability to notice life where most people saw only frost and bare soil. In the bleak midwinter, when gardens slept and storerooms thinned, chickweed crept in uninvited, weaving low mats of green along paths, walls, and even beneath the snow. Its tiny white star-shaped blooms looked fragile, yet the plant defied hard freezes and kept growing when others surrendered. That endurance made it a quiet savior during the hunger gap, the perilous stretch when stored food was almost gone and spring crops still weeks away. A handful of chickweed, fresh and crisp, could mean the difference between fatigue and the strength to keep working through the cold. Medieval families understood its power long before science could explain it. Today we know it carries more vitamin C than oranges, along with vitamins A and D, iron, calcium, and anti-inflammatory compounds. In an age when scurvy and weakness were constant threats, those nutrients were as valuable as coin. Children learned to spot it almost as soon as they could walk, turning gathering into a winter chore and a game. The bright leaves went into pottages, flatbreads, and simple salads, their freshness cutting through months of salted fare. Healers prized it just as highly, crushing it into poultices to cool fevers, soothe rashes, and heal burns. Because it was gentle, it could be given to the youngest and most frail without risk. Chickweed asked no permission, growing where it pleased and offering itself to anyone who knew where to look. In a world where food so often followed wealth, this humble green offered open-handed nourishment to anyone willing to bend down and gather it. Chickweed could appear anywhere, ready for the taking, but not every medieval food was left to chance. In some gardens, survival came from plants that looked after themselves year after year without demanding constant work. One of the most valued was a clump-forming onion that, once planted, could feed generations. This was the Welsh onion, a perennial marvel that multiplied in place season after season. Once its roots took hold, the plant formed tight green clusters that swelled each year, each harvest triggering new shoots. Families could cut the hollow leaves again and again, confident that they would regrow stronger, sharper, and more plentiful. Even in the depths of winter, when most crops lay dormant, fresh growth often pushed through the frost, offering a rare burst of green and nutrition when it was needed most. Their self-replenishing nature made Welsh onions more than a crop. They were an inheritance, much like the good King Henry patches that medieval gardeners also guarded for generations. Property records sometimes listed them alongside orchards and wells, prized for the fact that once established, they could feed not just the present family, but those yet to come. In the kitchen, they offered more complexity than modern scallions, with a sharper bite and deep savor that elevated everything from humble peasant stews to elaborate court dishes. Cooks chopped them fresh into breads and broths, dried them for the winter table, or pickled them in vinegar to preserve their brightness for months. Hardy to a fault, Welsh onions endured winter freezes, shrugged off summer droughts, and flourished in poor soils where other vegetables failed. They asked for nothing but a little space, and in return, they became one of the most reliable staples in the medieval garden, a living pantry that never ran dry. Welsh onions might have provided steady green flavor and reliability, but some medieval gardens sought intensity over abundance. For cooks inside monastery kitchens and manor houses, the goal wasn't just to fill the pot, but to transform it, and for that, they turned to a towering perennial whose flower could dominate an entire cauldron with a single leaf. Rising above the other herbs in the garden, lovage could reach the height of a grown man, its hollow stems thick as a child's wrist, its leaves broad and deeply cut. The scent alone announced its presence, a concentrated, almost peppery celery aroma that clung to the hands of anyone who touched it. Medieval cooks treated lovage like a spice rather than a vegetable. A single leaf could perfume a pot of pottage, enrich a meat broth, or cut through the heaviness of lentils and beans. In an era when salt and imported seasonings were costly, lovage offered a local perennial alternative that never failed to deliver impact. Physicians valued it just as highly. Lovage tea was prescribed for sluggish digestion, the roots steeped in wine for kidney and bladder ailments, and the seeds chewed as breath fresheners. In some towns, travelers arriving from long, hard roads would seek out inns or monasteries known for seasoning meals with lovage, believing it would settle the stomach and ward off illness. Once planted, lovage was a decades-long investment. It grew larger and more flavorful with age, often outliving the gardener who first set it in the soil. The deep roots could be harvested sparingly for medicinal use without harming the plant, ensuring a constant supply of both food and remedy. Its towering presence in the garden was far more than ornamental. It was a mark of foresight, prosperity, and skill. Lovage could transform a pot with a single leaf, its warmth and fragrance weaving through every bite. But some medieval cooks reached for an herb with a sharper, more defiant edge, one whose bright flowers and bitter bite carried meaning as well as flavor. Medieval cooks used tansy like a whetstone for tired food. The smallest pinch could cut through the heaviness of salted meats, Lenten porridges, and days-old bread stews. Festival kitchens leaned into its symbolism as well as its flavor. Easter tansy cakes and puddings balanced eggs, sugar, and spice with a prickle of bitterness that stood for penance and the turning of the season. Too much ruined the dish, and the right amount turned simplicity into statement. Households valued tansy as much off the table as on it. Bundles hung from beams and tucked into grain bins to drive out flies, weevils, and mice. Sprigs threaded into bedding and stored clothes helped keep lice and moths away. Butchers wrapped meat in fresh leaves, fishmongers lined baskets, brewers steeped a whisper of tansy into ales during warm months to sharpen flavor and slow spoilage. In burial customs, tansy joined rosemary and yew, sewn into shrouds or scattered in vigil rooms to sweeten the air and deter pests. Medieval herbalists called tansy potent and precise. They brewed light infusions for queasy stomachs and feverish aches, powdered the seed for breath fresheners, and pressed leaves into salves for bites and stings. Every recipe came with a caution: respect the dose. That edge, useful at a pinch, dangerous by the handful, made tansy the emblem of medieval pragmatism. Power kept in balance. For all its bite, tansy also brought beauty and life. Midsummer umbels thrummed with visiting insects, and well-placed borders guarded cabbages and beans without a single imported spice or costly resin. In gardens built on thrift and nerve, it was the hard line that kept hunger, rot, and vermin a step away. But not every medieval safeguard grew on the garden's edge. Sometimes the greatest defense against hunger came from a plant already in your hand, one so common it was almost invisible. Our final vegetable in today's episode stood as quiet proof that survival could come from the simplest source. Not a rare seed or distant trade good, but the leafy tops of the humble turnip, waiting above the soil for those who knew its worth. While modern cooks often toss them aside, Medieval families valued turnip greens as one of the most dependable sources of nutrition they could grow. These leafy tops contained 4 times more calcium than the root, 3 times more vitamin A, and significantly more protein. For households without steady access to dairy or meat, they were an irreplaceable lifeline. The genius was in the harvesting. Gardeners plucked the outer leaves all season, leaving the plant's heart intact so it could keep producing. This meant a single turnip patch could feed a family twice, first with fresh greens from spring through fall, then again in winter when the roots came out of storage. During the hunger gap of late winter, when stored vegetables were almost gone and new crops hadn't yet sprouted, overwintered turnip greens were often the first fresh taste of the year. Cooked like mustard greens, stirred into pottages, or sautéed with onions, they brought flavor and vitality at the moment it was needed most. Centuries of knowledge nearly lost. These vegetables fed empires, endured plagues, and could do it again, offering resilience our modern food system rarely matches. They carried families through winters, famine, and years when the soil seemed to give nothing back. In a world of perfect, uniform produce, they remind us that true strength lies in plants tested by hardship and proven by time. Which one surprised you most? Have you ever grown or tasted any of them? Tell us in the comments, and if you enjoyed this glimpse into history's hardiest crops, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more fascinating nature discoveries. This is Stellar Eureka, signing off.